This is the final video in our With For Ahead series. If you're watching this live at youth group, we miss you. I hope you guys are having a great night. Chris and I will be back next week for community night. Like I said, this is our third and final week of our With For Ahead series. We've already spent time learning that God is with us no matter what, and that God is for us even when no one else is. I hope you've been able to experience both of those things these last 2 weeks, but even more, I hope you've had a chance to live them out by being with others and being for them. Remember, God is with you in your success, in your sin, and in your suffering so that you can be with others. And don't forget that we can be for others by accepting where they're at, pursuing what's best for them, and calling them forward. Right now, we're going to see what it means that God goes ahead of us so that you and we can live in the present. But not only that, we're going to see how God going ahead of us gives us the opportunity to go ahead of others. Let's dive right in. When I was getting ready to graduate high school, I was pretty nervous about going to college. Don't get me wrong, I was excited and looking forward to all the cool things that college had to offer, but I was nervous too. I had decided to attend a school in Utah, and if you don't know, the majority of people in Utah are Mormons. I don't really want to get into the specifics, but Mormons are a different religion than Christians, and I was nervous about being surrounded by so many people who believed different things than me. I was nervous that I'd show up to school and be the only Christian on campus, that I'd be forced to have no friends because everybody else didn't believe in God the way I did. Now, I know that's a little bit irrational, but it's the truth. That's how I felt. To make matters worse, on my very first day on campus, I was moving all my things into my dorm, and I learned that all 5 of my roommates that year were Mormons. I immediately started to imagine all the arguments, disagreements, and spiritual debates we were going to have the rest of the semester. Those first few days on campus, I felt pretty alone. I felt like it'd probably be best if I just kept my head down and tried not to make too big of a deal out of being a Christian. For a few days, I drugged my feet in self-pity until I finally met a guy named Brad. Now, Brad was 50 or 60, so I was surprised when he approached me to talk about my faith and how he felt like God wanted to move on the college campus. Brad was the director of InterVarsity in Utah, and InterVarsity is an organization that has college-age Bible studies on campuses across the country. So to make a long story short, Brad told me how for years he'd been praying and trying to get InterVarsity started on my school campus, but he hadn't been able to gain any traction. Through the course of that conversation, I decided to join the cause and do whatever it took to help get the Bible studies up and running. Now, I wish I could say that over my time at the school, hundreds of kids started coming to our Bible studies and that the campus was transformed by Jesus. But in reality, for the next 3 years, me and about 10 to 15 other Christians, and sometimes non-Christians, we would gather to study the Bible together. It wasn't a lot of people, but it was the community I needed. Now, I tell you that story to make one simple point. God had gone ahead of me. Before I ever arrived at college, God was already on the campus moving through people like Brad. And because God was moving, because God went ahead of me, I was able to experience Christian community and His presence in the midst of what I thought was going to be a spiritual wilderness. Ultimately, God is moving everywhere. He's always active. He's always in pursuit of the lost. There's never been a place where God didn't go ahead and prepare the way. There will never be a place where you could go that God doesn't go ahead of you. You see, God is with you in the present. God is for you, meaning He wants what's best for you and is willing to take actionable steps to seek it out. But God also goes ahead of you. He goes before you to prepare the way. Just like my college experience, even when things seem hopeless or it seems like God isn't moving, He's already gone ahead and prepared the way. Way back in the Old Testament, Moses tells the Israelites, "The Lord is the one who goes ahead of you. He will be with you. He will not fail you or forsake you. Do not fear or be dismayed." In the same way, God, speaking through the prophet Isaiah, said this, "I will go before you and make the rough places smooth. I will shatter the doors of bronze and cut through their iron bars." So what does this mean for us? I think 2 things. God goes ahead of you so you can live in the present. If you and I can understand, experience, and trust that God goes before us, that he prepares the way, then we have no reason to worry about the future. Now, I know that's way easier said than done, but stop and think about it. If you know, experience, and trust that the God of the universe is with you, for you, and goes ahead of you, if you know that he's prepared a path for you to walk down, then it doesn't really matter how rough the path is. It doesn't matter if you can't see where the path is going. If you trust the person who created the path, if you trust the person who is leading you down the path, then why would you worry? Because God goes ahead of us. Because God prepares the way, you and I, we can focus on living in the present by giving our full attention to each and every moment. Because that's all we really have anyway. Second, God goes ahead of us, then we get to participate in what God is already doing. If you know that God is moving, if you know that he's already at work, then all we need to do is ask how we can help. So often we get caught up in asking God to move. We get caught up in trying to be the one to create movement, to create the transformation. So often we live like if we stopped moving, if we stopped trying, if we stopped initiating, then God would stop. And that is simply not the truth. The truth is God is going ahead of each and every one of us. God is active and moving even when we are not. So each and every situation that you walk into, whether it's at school, on a sports team, with your family, God's already moving in that place. He's already active. It's our job to get on board. It's our job to align ourselves with what God is already doing and partner with him to make it happen. The same's true for individuals. God is already active and moving in every person's life. Every teammate, every classmate, every family member, God is already working in their heart. Rather than trying to make it all happen on your own, rather than trying to kickstart transformation through your own strength or ingenuity, what if we could start looking at every situation, at every relationship, as an opportunity to align ourselves, to partner with God in what he is already doing. This idea of aligning ourselves with God, of partnering with him, leads me to our second big idea, that God goes ahead of us so that we can go ahead of others. Now, you can't literally go into the future and go ahead of people. I hope that's pretty obvious. But if God is already moving, if God goes ahead, then when you and I take the time to thoughtfully pray, we can go ahead of others. It's through prayer that we can align ourselves and partner with what God is already doing. When we stop and pray for the situations and relationships in our lives, when we stop and ask God to reveal to us where and how he's already moving, when we commit to aligning ourselves with him, then we go ahead of others. You can almost think of this idea as premeditated acts of love. We go ahead of others when we take the time to pray, to align ourselves with what God is doing, and then decide how we'll love others ahead of time. Ultimately, premeditating acts of love, deciding ahead of time you're going to act lovingly towards someone, is the best way to go ahead of them. Because here's the truth. When we try to love in the moment, when we try to act lovingly based on how we feel, we're inconsistent, we're selfish, and we're unreliable. When we base our acts of love towards other people on how we feel, it's really all about us. If our capacity to be loving is based on our feelings, then we've missed the whole point of love. Your life can't be one reaction after another. Your life, your decisions, your actions can't be based simply on how you feel. Because love requires intentionality. It requires choice. It requires planning. And the best way to be intentional, the best way to choose, the best way to plan is through prayer. So here's my challenge for you this week. God goes ahead of you, so it's time to start going ahead of others. Who's one person you can pray for by name this week? Once you've decided who the person is, here's what I want you to do. Spend time in prayer asking God, what are you already doing in this person's life, and how can I get involved? How can I partner with you in transforming their life? Then, listen. See what God has to say. Listen for how he wants to invite you into what he's already doing. And then the last step, plan ahead. Plan ahead an act of love for that person. Maybe it's deciding ahead of time to bring them coffee this week or to write them an encouraging note or letter. Maybe it's something bigger than that. Choose a person to pray for by name. Ask God how you can partner with them. Premeditate an act of love. God goes ahead of you. Now you go ahead of others. And never forget, God is with you, God is for you, and God goes ahead of you. For those of you watching this live at youth group, Franklin's going to come up and dismiss you into your small groups. We'll see you next week.